Indiana. Last year at the ICA in Boston, we inaugurated a new program component, a new series we call Master Classes. And when I queried the ICA student group or list or whatever they are about their ideas for who we should invite to give these new master classes, one name came up repeatedly on these lists. That was Annie Lang. I suspect that those who put her name down had the opportunity to hear her, because she really is a memorable speaker and really quite, no pressure, Amy, quite appropriate for the designation of a master teacher. One of the things I think you'll find is that if you have assumptions, she will unsettle them. And I think that is really one of the definitions of a master teacher, so I will not take up any more of her time.
Thank you very much, and thanks to everybody for having me on. No, that's all right. Wait till the end and see if you still feel like it. So I said to Larry that I started this talk out. My first version had 254 slides, and you'll be glad to know I'm down to 121, so let's get going. So observe. So probably you didn't know what to do when I said that. And Darwin says how odd it is that anyone should not see that all observation must be for or against some view if it is to be of any service. So I would follow that up with Kuhn saying that if you don't have a paradigm, one of the most misused terms in all of everything, then you're just looking around. But if you have a paradigm, then you're looking with difficulty for something you expect to see. And that's what I mean by observation. So we don't just look at things. We think they are something, and we look to see if they are what we think. So Kuhn's structure of scientific revolutions, Al Gore's favorite book, he says, is perfectly well known to all of you. It's excruciatingly well known to me because I teach a class called Philosophy of Inquiry, and I've been teaching it for 17 years or 14 years or something, and I have to reread Kuhn every single year. So I feel like I'm an expert. And so it has this basic pre-paradigmatic period: first paradigm, normal science, anomaly, crisis, revolutionary science, paradigm shift, and then repeat from normal science ad infinitum, or until you figured out how everything works. Like, 42 being the answer to the universe, but I don't know if we'll get there. So a paper I gave at ICA last year, which got some comment, was I made an argument that mass communication, if not all of communication, was in a crisis period. So that means we have a paradigm, and we've gone through normal science, and we were having a crisis, and that we were entering a period of revolutionary science and waiting for our paradigm shift. So I'm going to go through the reasons why I think that, and then I'm going to suggest a way forward into a new paradigm, which is very egocentric. So what do you get from a paradigm? An understanding of the fundamental nature of the thing you're studying. Okay, so I'm not going to, just going on. You get novel-specific and particular methods for observing it, and you get agreement about what the important questions are. What is it we're all trying to answer as we study communication? So I made the argument that effects theory, or mass communication effects, was the first paradigm of mass communication. And Kuhn says, if you want to see if you have a paradigm, look at your textbooks. And because the textbooks are written by the victors, i.e. the paradigm winners, and they come from an achievement. Somebody has done something that was so impressive that the rest of the field gave up what they were doing and said, I'm going to go do that. So it's something they coalesce around. And our textbook suggests that the work of Lazarsfeld might be that work in communication, from which we got our questions, the fundamental nature for the phenomena, and methods for studying it. So if mass communication effects is our paradigm, what are those things? Well, I would argue that the fundamental nature of the thing, mass communication, that we're studying was defined as, with mass communication as an agent for change in society, which is sometimes called technological determinism, and that society and people are essentially stable, so they're homeostatic balance and equilibrium models, and communication is trying to push things out of balance all the time. Our methods were social scientific and primarily survey methods, and our questions focused on the change factor, on the effects wrought by mass communication on people or on society. Not a bad place to start, right? So, crisis occurs when an anomaly occurs in the data, and an anomaly is something that your fundamental nature of your theory says can't occur. So this year when I was teaching Kuhn, this happened. How perfect. That, these guys over at CERN found a particle that was moving faster than light. Now, physics says nothing can move faster than light. That's an assumption. And so that's an anomaly in the data, right? And this is what happens if you're in crisis. If it is true, then we truly haven't understood anything about anything. Okay, so I'm arguing for crisis, so that means that none of you know anything, and neither do I. We can live with that. Okay, the other time crisis occurs is when progress is not being made. Right? Because one of the things we say about science is it progresses. It increases our understanding and our explanatory power about the world. And sometimes theories, paradigms continue to increase in complexity, but they fail to increase in generality and explanatory power. So Copernican astronomy is an example of a response to that kind of increase in complexity and lack of generality. Until they moved the Earth out of the center of the universe, astronomy was stuck. They had to keep making more and more little specific changes to the theory and getting less and less generality out of the theory. And that's what I think is happening to us. Very little progress is being made. We have limited results, increasing complexity, no real explanatory understanding of communication. Another way you see crisis happening is that your field starts to fall apart. And I'm going to argue that we see a fair amount of splintering over the last 30 years or so in the field of mass communication. So the first obvious splinter group, now I'm going to argue a discipline of their own, completely broken away, is the critical cultural approach. And their big problem was that the big question in the effects paradigm is an assumption in their approach. Mass communication has effects. Look around you, it's obvious stuff. Okay? So obviously they can't ask the question, does mass communication have an effect? Instead, they say, of course they have effects. Mass communication, specifically, are expressions of power operating on and within relatively malleable humans and social systems. They're stepping away from homeostasis. People change, social systems change, and you can use mass communication to try and hold on to what you got before you become the less power. The methods have changed. They're qualitative, they're subjective, and they're non-generalizable. The approach changed from explanatory to critical. And you could argue they made a shift from social to individual level understanding and from science to humanistic approaches. So I would argue that this is an entirely different discipline from the social scientific mass communication effects paradigm. And in fact, it's often presented as in opposition to the standard effects paradigm. And it's often taught as, obviously they're wrong because they have all this wrong. And in effect, I would argue that they're just different. But I would agree that we have things wrong. So another splinter group, and this is the one I'm most familiar with, I would argue comes from biology, basically. And it argues for an evolutionary perspective, experimental methods, dynamic systems theories, process not change-oriented, and movement away from self-report towards variables not accessible to introspection. So I'm going to talk about this one a little bit because it stays scientific and is continuing to look for explanations of how communication works as opposed to deciding to do something else. So in the effects paradigm, the old view was that communication is an external force for change in otherwise stable humans and societies. The new one argues that evolutionary development promotes species individual survival by increasing adaptability to an unstable environment. So No more homeostasis, no more stable environments. They're unstable. The goal is for us to survive by adaptation. So biological and media systems are embedded in an environment and social and cultural systems. So people are so thoroughly embedded in the world that you can't understand us separate from the world. Okay, so we have to start considering the world. It's important. And both humans and the environment are changing over time. There is none of this homeostasis involved going on here. Okay, if not affects what? New questions, old questions. What is the effect of X message and Y medium on Z group? New question. How do humans/groups interact with one another in various environments through and with various media to promote their goals and avoid harm? It's kind of a different question. Old approach led to a lot of mid-range theorizing. So we can change the Y, change the Z, change the X, and keep doing the same thing, get a lot of description, but we don't get more explanation. The new goal is general theory, where humans, groups, media contents, and environments are variables in the same theory. So you have one theory, you can look, it should apply across groups, across media contents, across environments, and across variables. Be cool if it happened, you know? And new methods. Old methods, primarily static surveys. New methods, dynamic systems methodologies. Old methods, reliance on self-report measures. New, increasing use of covert measures. Old, some experiments are done to determine causality and the time course of media effects. New, experimental and computational, designed to track processes over time. So, here we are, I say, in a period of revolutionary science. One of the things that's really surprised me since I gave my talk and sent my paper out to the world last summer was the number of people who have said through email, in person, on the telephone, I agree. I was kind of surprised. And there are a lot of people who are looking for new ways to study communication. And there was a big listserv thing in the information systems listserv last year about what are the big questions we're trying to answer. Do we know what they are? Can we agree what they are? Like when you go to take your first psychology class, they say, we're trying to understand how people think. That's their big question. And we don't really have one. So we're looking for big questions, and we need a new achievement that will give us a new way forward and a new paradigm theory. Okay, I'll buy into that. How about this one? so my what now is the next part of the talk, and I've never presented it to anyone before. Hear it? No, I've been writing it for a while, so we'll see how this goes. So this is like the book I'm writing, which is really bad and not right yet, but anyway, it's called Human Media Interaction, Evolved Brains Interacting in a Built World. Nice title. So we'll go through its chapters a little bit here and see how you like that. Human media interaction, a human first perspective. Okay, so we need to define communication from a human first perspective. Anne Boleyn said, all I said was, what if the castle moved towards more peasant-centered inquiry? It didn't go real well for her, but I'm hopeful. So I'm not trying to say that everybody should do individual level research. I'm trying to say that the human communicates and therefore constrains everything involved with human communication. We're not going to have communication occurring at frequencies we can't hear. We're not going to have communication occurring at speeds we can't process. We're not going to have communication happening in wavelengths we can't see. We constrain. We are the biological basis for communication. I'm not talking about media psychology, which to me right now looks like social psychological explanations for effects. I'm not talking about physiological measures. Everybody always says, oh, she does physiological measures. I use them because they're dynamic and they're covert, but it's not my thing. My thing is something else. So it means defining what one is studying, starting from the invariance about humans. How do our systems work? And moving towards variables like media content, and society and culture. So we can't define communication in terms of interpersonal rhetoric, mass media, computer system, strategic. No, general theory means we got one theory, it works for all of them. All of them. We're not starting with professions, advertising, PR, journalism, whatever. One theory works for all of them. We're not starting with genres. I don't care if it's the news or an advertisement or a suspense. One theory works for all of them. We're not starting with media. One theory. It's got to work for all of them. We're starting with the human brain. I stole this definition from John Cherry. Communication is the scientific study of processes by which brains interact. My brain is talking to your brain. How does it do that? That's the question. This is great. It's a good start, but we're going beyond it. We need some fundamental assumptions. If this is communication, then what's our big question? How do brains interact? Voila. Next. Assumption 1, brains are old and they evolved. Cherry plus Darwin. If you say that the brain evolved, then we're going to bring with you a bunch. I should have gotten a picture of John. Note to self. It brings with it a set of assumptions. Species evolved through a process of natural selection, which allows long-term adaptation to occur. The time scale is super slow. Super slow. We have not evolved in the last several 100,000 years. So adaptations occur in humans to relative invariance in the environment. I'm going to use this word a lot, invariance. I'm going to stop here for a moment and say what's an invariant is something that doesn't change on evolutionary time. So that's things that haven't changed for hundreds of thousands of years. But there's lots of fast-moving things in the world that we ought to adapt to, like cell phones and filtered water. And, I don't know. I didn't turn the sound off on my cell phone. What a time to remember it. Anyway, so if you didn't turn yours off, don't worry about it. We need to be able to adapt on the fly to these fast-moving things because we can't evolve to adapt to them. So brains evolved to enable short-term adaptation. We do it by thinking. So Sherry becomes communication is the interaction of evolved brains. The second part of evolution is that our brains are embodied. They're organs. They evolved to think. Thinking is a physiological and biological activity. It requires blood, oxygen, chemicals, etc. Consciousness is an emergent property of brains. I'm not a dualist. Sorry, Descartes. I don't believe in souls. It's just the way your brain works. Okay. So a lot of thinking work in the brain is automatic. You can't stop it. It occurs without conscious awareness and requires few or no cognitive resources. Now, I put this here because our brains are really big and they're really evolved compared to other animals' brains. But all animals that have brains got them for the same reason, to help them survive. But what they don't have are these giant frontal lobes that allow you to think about things that don't really exist. So those brains tend to work automatically. They process information coming in and enable automatic responses that help animals to survive. So I'm going to talk a lot about what our brains do automatically, because we didn't lose that when we developed the ability to be self-aware and to think and to handle symbols and to do all that kind of stuff. So we still are doing all kinds of automatic processing all of the time, but you can't stop it. That's what automatic means. You're not aware of it. You can't tell me about it. That's what automatic means. And it's cheap. It's not taking up much space in your brain. Okay? So, most of what we're doing at any time, is being monitored, controlled by the embodied brain without your doing anything to make it happen. You don't have to think, I'm going to make this gesture. Now I'm going to look around to see, oh, there's a movement over there. None of that enters your consciousness. I'm thinking about what I'm going to say. So Sherry becomes communications, interaction, involved, embodied brains. Embedded. Has anyone read this book, Supersizing the Mind? Isn't it great? Mm-hmm. My God, it blows your mind. Read this book. Andy Clark wrote it. He's a philosopher, and he's a philosopher of the mind. And he says that we're embedded. Of course we're embedded. We never were anywhere else but embedded. We evolved embedded. The world has always been there. So he says, so you're always somewhere, and the somewhere has invariance, like gravity, like light. It always gets lighter, and then it gets darker, and then it gets lighter, and then it gets darker. These things have been going on forever. And our brain evolved with these invariants, and it makes sense to imagine that it would use the world to think. That you don't have to take the world into your brain if you can count on it staying there. Right? Why would I? Why would I? So he says, supersize the mind. We think through the world. That thinking involves loops out into the physical world and back in. This is a story in there, which I'm going to tell a little of, but it's going to make me talk too long, but I can't help it. But this is a study with, this is actually a picture of one of the subjects in the study, who is a chimpanzee or an ape of some kind, and they have this mechanical arm, which they teach the chimp to use. So first they measured the chimps, they use, single cell electrodes to measure the haptic system, the feeling of touch as the chimp reaches out to do tasks. And after the chimp has got it all learned, they map exactly how its sensory system is mapping onto the brain, into the haptic cortex. And then they teach him to do it with this arm. And at first, the chimp's terrible at it, and you can see that the haptic system goes down, and then there's all these things. And as the chimp does it, you actually see the haptic system extend until when he's an expert, that arm is now part of the brain mapping. So he's brought that artificial arm into his brain, and it's now part of his brain, part of his body. It's embedded. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, and we'll talk more about this later. But so now we've got these embedded, evolved, embodied brains interacting. And so now, where do media come into the human-centric view? Here we go, because everything's got to be human-centric. James and Eleanor Gibson, ecological perception theory. Not necessarily all that current in a lot of cognitive science, but I think that they're missing the boat, and they'll come back to it. But their theory is called ecological perception, or the theory of affordances. And it says that the world is made up of substances. So that's like air, light, water. Surfaces. So that's like ground, walls, tabletops. Objects, rocks, tables, basketballs. Remote controls, or what I call God sticks. Animals. I have an ego problem. I call it a God stick. My Kindle's name is God. If you have a Kindle, you know when you buy a book, you press the button and it says sending wirelessly to God. Gives me a thrill every time. Okay, and animals. Dogs, cats, and humans, whatever. Animals. Okay, so an affordance is what the substance, service, object, or animal can provide to the perceiver. Now, the really important thing about this theory is that the affordances are in the object. So this tabletop affords what it affords. And even if I don't see it, it affords it. Okay? But you perceive, according to Gibson, the affordances automatically. That means without thinking about it, without searching your memory for them or any of that. And you perceive, the ones you perceive depend on the embeddedness, what you're doing, what you're trying to do, what's going on in that space and that time. So right here, the obvious affordance is a place to put your lunch. And we can all see that. Or a place to sit at and put your stuff in front of you. But if it were freezing cold and the electricity was out, it'd be a nice thing to burn and keep us warm. And we'd see that affordance when we needed it. Okay? So affordances are in the object, perceived automatically. So this is a mechanism of embedded thinking. The world tells you what to do, but you don't have to ask it. It happens automatically because we evolved together. Well, we evolved and it was there. Okay, so keeping going. The world is made up of substances, surfaces, object, rocks. We said that. So substances afford all kinds of things like, breathing, swimming, whatever. But from our point of view, air affords hearing. Light affords vision, which is the original media of brain-to-brain interaction. So I'm going to argue there is no brain-to-brain interaction that is not mediated. So I've just taken interpersonal communication and grabbed it into my theory. Okay? Because it's all happening through air and light. And air and light were the original media. Surfaces afford action in ecological theory, perception theory. Objects afford behavior. And animals afford social behavior. Okay, keep this in mind. It's important to what's coming next. Definition of an animal, according to Gibson, is it has to have a body envelope, a relatively defined closed shape. it has to be able to change its external appearance. Okay, like people, we can smile, we can take different positions, we can wear different clothes, we can do all kinds of things to change our external position. Third, it must display animate, self-generated behavior, and then you don't know what I'm going to do next, because I'm generating the behavior. Okay, here comes the wonky part. So, let's take Gibson and add to it reason math. My academic father. Okay, and the media equation. People respond to media like real life. And people interact with media as if they were people. Now, a lot of people think this is weird. They still don't like this idea, but it fits perfectly with what I'm about to say, which is that media meet the criteria for animals. They mostly have a closed body envelope. They come in a box, right? Most of them come in a box. They change their appearance, right? TV's got, 1 minute it's got Pepsi-Cola on it, the next minute it's got somebody killing somebody on it, the next minute it's got something else on it. Now, it's not happening because it wanted to, but it's changing its appearance. And they appear to display animate behavior. They do stuff that you didn't make them do, right? So I forgot to turn my cell phone off. It might ring, and it'll be like it's displaying animate behavior. Now, your conscious mind knows all that's true, but your automatic, evolved, embedded, embodied brain don't have any idea that everything is real. So when you combine all that other Gibson stuff with the media equation, you could say that media are animals and therefore brain-like. They are like brains. We interact with them like brains. That's what the media equation tells us. So, Sherry plus Darwin plus Carr plus Gibson plus Reeves equals Lang. Communication is the interaction of some combination of embedded, evolved, embodied brains and brain-like creatures. So, I want to know how that happens. That's my big question. I want it to be your big question. Of course, we love media. So, how do you like your new cell phone? Oh my God, I just love it. As a matter of fact, last week we flew to Las Vegas and got married. Not that funny. Have you ever asked your students to give up their cell phones? Not happening. They like them more than their girlfriends and boyfriends. That was chapter 1. Have I disturbed you yet? Oh my gosh, 29 minutes down. Chapter 2, the nested systems of humans. This is a really long chapter. I'm not going to tell you much about it except a couple of examples. But nestedness is that each system functions on its own as a system, but at the same time it functions as part of a higher order system, which is functioning as part of a higher order system, all of which constrain one another. Okay? So the combinations of systems constrain and reduce the possible actions, I spelled that wrong, at a given time, at a given place, with a given individual, and that's what we need to study. So in the media-centric view, which I don't approve of, those are the systems that matter, or some of them. In the human-centric view, these are the systems that matter. The motivational system, the central nervous system, the perceptual system, the cognitive system, and then they're all embedded in environmental, social, and cultural systems, which also matter a lot. But I will give no examples from those levels at this time, because A, I'm profoundly ignorant, and B, I only have a few minutes. So, for each system, we want to consider things like, what's the primary function of the system? Why is it there? Not what do we use it for, but why did it evolve? To what things in the world does the system respond automatically? Okay, those are the things that can control it. Because that means, remember, automatic means you can't control it, something else is controlling it. What's the time course of the system? Is it fast, acting in milliseconds? Is it slow, acting in hours, days, years, months? Depends. How does the system limit and interact with other systems? So, how does my perceptual system limit the social system? How does the social system limit my perceptual system? Good questions to ask. How can human-centric things about the system be used to explain communication? Because this is a human-centric perspective. Example, human perceptual systems. We can't be aware of everything in the environment all the time. We all know that, right? So we have lots of systems that are involved in involved automatically in the process of selecting what to be aware of. Okay, so I just noticed that person come in the back of the room. You didn't, your back's to him, but it was perfect timing. Thank you very much. My system said, new person in the room, and I looked, even though I'm in the middle of giving a talk, because I had to, because my automatic system says, could be danger back there in the corner. That's the process of biasing our senses towards goal achievement and so on. Okay, here's a big important point. It's going to be in red. Bias is a natural, automatic, evolved, adaptive, energy-saving characteristic of humans. Natural, automatic, evolved, adaptive, energy-saving. In the new way, media are not biased and do not bias people. Rather, people perceive the world in a biased way. And this sounds like critical cultural theory, right? Everybody is constructing their own reality. I agree. People perceive the world in a biased way. We all perceive the world somewhat differently because of our past experience, our current biological system state, our current goals, and our current goals, period. So, the question should not be, does some type of medium, content, or production feature bias people in some particular way, but rather, how do the automatic, unconscious aspects of human interact with relevant, human-centric definitions of media to bias perception, selection, cognitive processing, motivational activation, and behavior? In other words, I want to be able to explain